Well, here we are once again on a Friday afternoon, and the only thing, Jen Gerson, that jumps out at me is that what the hell is going to get dropped on us after Friday? Because I think twice,
Yeah,
I think both of our last two dispatches, we've had breaking news to deal with on Friday. So we'll see what
we're
the news gods bring.
we're the scoop whisperers, and also we've decided to take a real chance by hosting this particular chat early on Friday too. We're not even waiting till the evening.
There's no point. I mean, it screws up our plans either way. Can I just mention as a programming note, I think we're not doing a podcast next week because
because you're
yeah,
off.
I am
Damn, all
off.
right. I gotta start thinking about what I'm gonna do.
No, I'll leave you. I'll leave you some stuff. We'll like written
right.
pieces. We'll be fine on.
Okay.
But for a dispatch next week, I'm not even bringing my computer with me. So
Good for you.
maybe I'll bang out something on my phone for you. But no, as of it's just
I don't
my
really
wife's.
need you to bang out something on your phone for me. Thanks. I'm
Whee!
good.
My wife's work schedule is off the schedule of everybody else, so our March break is next week.
Yes, fair enough. I don't know exactly when our March break is. It may also be next week, in which case we're doubly screwed. But
we already have two pieces in the bank, and I'll write one, so that's three.
We'll be fine. We'll be fine. We'll be fine. Worst case scenario, if we need to do a light March break, I'm sure it will be fine. You will be hearing my children in the background. Both of them are home at the moment, and Elizabeth has covered herself in blue, so that she may
marker, right?
Blue marker, yeah, blue marker. Okay. So we're gonna see how that goes.
Okay, are they at least dressed?
Yes, we've insisted upon them being dressed. Elizabeth is on a bit of a pants strike at the moment, but
I remember there was a long time, every year I kept thinking this would be the year the kids would just stop randomly ripping all their clothes off and being naked. And we got there eventually, but it took a lot longer than I expected.
It took a lot longer than you'd think. Yeah. Especially girls for some reason. They're just like, woo!
Yep. C18. You're all keyed up on
that. I'm pissed. I'm angry.
So salty language.
Yeah, so basically, this is a latest piece from Professor Michael Geist. He writes this thing that notes that a motion is about to be put forward at committee, I presume at the Senate committee, because not the House committee, that calls on Meta and Google to disclose all of the private correspondence that they've had on C18 and I believe also C11.
The C18 is the Online News Act. C11 is content regulation.
It's the content regulations. Yeah. And this gets really borked because not only that, they want the companies to disclose also any third-party organizations that they've paid to do advocacy work for them. I actually think that's pretty reasonable. But also to disclose any internal or external communications that they've done with any of those third parties. So if they have coordinated or chatted with any journalists about C18, that would fall under the mandate of the scope of the mandate. So there's a couple things I find really messed up about this is that, firstly, I don't really care about Meta and Google's reputation. So let's just put that aside for a moment. And let's also have this start with a caveat with this conversation with the obvious rebuttal. And that is, I have no concerns about anything they would disclose about me. Like, I have no concerns at all. I have not coordinated with these companies on these files. I've taken no money from these companies on these files, neither of you. So the line has no issue here. All right. We really don't. If Facebook and Google were to release everything they had for the last 3 years, we come out looking like gems. All right. I've got no issue. The only thing I have to disclose on this is that I think last year, Google paid for the plane ticket so that I could attend the Walrus Gala and sit at their table. But we didn't discuss C18, we didn't coordinate C18. The only thing we talked about is I explained to them that the metaverse was going to enslave humanity, and I never got invited back. So there you go. So like, it was not related to C18 at all. They were trying to fill out a table for a charity gala and thought I might be fun conversation. Like that's what happened there.
In fairness, so you are.
I'm great dinner conversation.
You are
hilarious. So anyway, and I not infrequently get invited to things like this simply because, you know, they kind of want a little sparkle at the table. It tends to be what happens. But anyway.
Same reason I'm not invited.
Yeah, precisely. There's a reason why I'm the vision. Okay, let's just put it that way. I'm the sparkle. But anyway, I don't even think that would fall under the disclosures that what the government is asking for, because it had nothing to do with these bills whatsoever. Okay, but I'm proactively disclosing that.
And I will proactively disclose, Jen, that I've gone through all my records. I have zero to disclose as relates to C18, Google, or Meta. Nothing. Neither does the line.
We would come out looking like roses in this situation. So I'm not afraid of what the disclosure is, But I find it incredibly fucked up that a government committee would ask for or demand, in this case, private disclosures going back on a 3-year time frame. I think that's insane. I think that that's a total overreach of their mandate and their power. And look, I mean, there's a couple of things here, and that is, yes, I can go and file an ATIP and ask the government for all of its disclosures and all of its communications. That's because the government works for me and you. The government works for us. Like, we pay it with our taxpayer dollars. We're entitled to that information because they serve us. The onus doesn't go the other way around. A private company or a private individual doesn't owe the government that kind of information. They are allowed to coordinate. They're allowed to have, conversations and strategize about these sorts of issues. And of course, this is all happening in relation to the fact that both Google and Facebook have now explicitly explicitly threatened or inferred that if C-18 goes through, they're going to respond in a totally logical fashion for any kind of private business. If Facebook is forced to pay media companies for hosting links that it does not post on its platform, its response to that is going to be to not host links anymore. Like, no shit, Sherlock.
Yep.
And the government is responding by saying, well, that's an intimidation tactic. Is it? I just think it's a rational response to the law they're putting out. The government clearly didn't think that that was going to happen, and is responding in turn by saying, well, screw you. We're going to demand all of your private communications, and we're going to reveal all of your third-party strategists, and we want you to disclose this and this and this. I just think, firstly, this is so fucked up. It's such an invasion of privacy on principle. If the government thinks that Facebook or Google has done anything wrong or illegal, to me, the appropriate avenue would be to get a warrant. Get a warrant. You know what I mean? Like, get a warrant. That's an appropriate disclosure, and then investigate away. I don't care. And then the other thing is, like, I do actually think it's perfectly appropriate, and I think it's actually perfectly fine for them to ask for Facebook and Google to give them a disclosure of any entities they've funded to advocate on their behalf for C-18. I actually think that is totally reasonable. But beyond that, this is getting a little nuts. So anyway, what I think is actually happening here is that they know very well that Facebook and Google aren't going to comply with this, because it's bonkers for them to do so. And it would also be potentially disclosing major privacy issues with members of the public, and also the journalists who have been corresponding with Facebook and Google on this bill, which they have every right to do. You want to go meddle in this?
And not necessarily collaboratively. Like, that could sweep up communications of journalists or publishers or directors of news companies saying, you guys are fucking assholes.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. And disclose this for public viewing in ways that are completely inappropriate. And so I think that they're not going to comply, even though my understanding is that, like, this is actually illegal. Like, they can demand this. And if Facebook and Google decline to comply, then there is a potential that they could be held in contempt of Parliament. I don't think it would go that far, because I think that to get them to be held in contempt of Parliament would require some procedural hurdles that I don't think are going to get met. But I think what's happening here is that you've got the government demanding all this disclosure that is way beyond what's reasonable, and is frankly kind of frightening, because they are trying to expose dissenters on this front.
Mm-hmm.
And then what I think is going to happen is Facebook and Google are going to refuse to comply, and then the government's going to come back and say, look at these secretive big tech companies refusing to comply with government requests, right? What are they hiding? What third-party organizations are being funded by this? They won't tell us. So I think this is all just a game of cat and mouse for them. I think it's very ugly. I think it's a very nasty way of going about it. And my response to this is, yes, in principle, I'm totally opposed to this, because I just think it's way beyond the scope of a government to be doing something of this nature. But if you are going to go forward and do something like this, why stop at Facebook and Google? Let's get the last 3 years of correspondence from the newspaper lobbying arms who have been lobbying for C-18. Let's see what News Media Canada has been up to for the last 3 months or last 3 years. Why stop there? Why are you only going after Facebook and Google?
I would love to see all the internal communications from all these organizations relating to everything related to C-18.
Yes,
Meta,
absolutely.
and Facebook,
absolutely. And actually, you know what? part of the testimony that we've heard again and again and again at C18 is that this particular bill would not compromise journalistic integrity, wouldn't compromise coverage. That's a load of bullshit, and you and I both know it. But let's see the proof in the pudding. If these journalistic entities who want this money through C18 are so confident that C18 would not impinge upon their journalistic integrity, let's see them disclose their editorial communications about C18 and C11 at committee. Let's see. If you feel justified, morally and legally and ethically justified, getting all of Facebook and Google's communications, fine. I want News Media Canada, and I want all of the organizations that stand to profit by C18 to disclose all of their internal communications about how they've chosen to cover these bills. Sunlight's the best disinfectant, as they say. Let's see that.
I'm grinning just because I'm thinking of some of the internal communications I myself have seen with my own two eyes.
Yeah.
I believe there would be reluctance among the media companies for some of that correspondence to become public.
I also believe that the media would not like to be subject to exactly the same levels of scrutiny that the government is now demanding of these other private companies. I think there would be some hell to pay, and I am here for it, baby. Give me the fucking popcorn. Let's see it all.
No, I'm with you. And I would also, I mean, at a certain point, I don't know if the Liberals and is the opposition, the NDP and the Bloc, are they with the Liberals on this?
Yeah, more or less, because the NDP firstly isn't I think they're kind of ineffectual, but the Bloc is of course beholden to a lot of these, especially French media language. Quebecor and a lot of French media. It actually astonished me how much more support for C18 you saw from a lot of the French media than you saw even from the English media.
Well, you and I, how do I say this? I'm trying to think of a way to say this without getting us sued. You and I are well aware of the fact that there are either outlets or individuals at outlets who are considered more friendly to the government's agenda than not. Would love to see those communications. Like at a certain point, the government and the Bloc and the NDP may need to be reminded that privacy exists for a reason.
Yeah.
And what's also good for the goose is good for the gander, and so on and so forth.
That's exactly it. That's my argument, is that I do believe that these companies do have a right to privacy. I think they have the right to strategize without government interference.
Yeah, but so you know what, Jen, you're right, but I would actually go further. I would reverse the equation here. Individual Canadians have a right to secure communications between themselves and private entities.
That's correct. Yeah. That's correct. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Now, again, I have nothing to disclose. I've already searched my inbox today. Nothing.
I'm not worried.
In there, but
I'm not worried.
Yeah,
I am not remotely concerned. But if you want to abolish those sorts of norms of privacy and communication, then you shouldn't be abolishing those norms for only one entity. You should be abolishing those norms for all of the entities involved in this bill. Let's see who comes out smelling good.
No, I'm here for it. You know, if we're gonna have mandatory disclosure of private and personal communications between individual Canadians and private sector entities, okay. I think it's a terrible idea, but if we're gonna do it, let's do it all the way.
Let's do it all the way.
Let's just go for it.
And I would say that even with the caveat that I do think there's one thing that potentially would pass at motion that I think is perfectly reasonable. And again, I'd state, I think it is reasonable for the committee to ask whether or not Facebook has funded any third-party entities to testify against C18. Agreed. I think that's a reasonable disclosure. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't protest that one iota.
Nope. No, I'm with you on that one. There might be privacy implications even there, commercial contracts, non-disclosures, things like that.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that they also would be shocked by how little there actually is. Or maybe I'm being naive. I don't know. No one's paid me or offered me any money to write about this shit.
I'll be honest with you. I actually don't think I have an opinion on that. I don't think I'd be shocked either way. I don't think I have an opinion on that. But I think that is a more reasonable ask. But I still think there'd be legal impediments here. Parliament has broad powers, though.
Yes. That's right.
Parliament can do a lot of stuff. And on the one hand, I kind of wish our parliamentarians had bigger balls, firmer spines, were willing to actually use some of those powers more often. But Jugmeet Singh of the NDP grilling grocery store guys about why they're making more money when food's more expensive. And, the C18 and C11 stuff, it's all just a kind of disgusting backdrop, if I can be blunt about this, to the Liberals and their desperate evasive maneuvers to keep Katie Telford from testifying here. Like
Well,
they want our
it.
communications, but they don't want Telford to testify.
Well, and this is the great irony about all of this. They're demanding more transparency and rapidity than any department in their government has ever displayed in 20 years.
Our notoriously broken access to information
notoriously broken access to information system. If you were to put any request of this nature, and this is written almost like an ATIP request, if you were to put a similar request in to any government department who are actually legally obligated to keep files and report to issue those files to the public,
should we do that?
Yeah, we probably should. But anyway, like they're obligated to do this. But if you were to put a similar type of request into any government department, it'll take you 5 years and half of it will come back redacted.
They're asking, maybe we should do it.
No, we should. But I mean, they're asking for more openness and transparency from private companies and private individuals than any of their departments have ever demonstrated, ever, as far as I can tell. Like I'm actually pissed, and not because I am personally as a human being pissed off. I'm
out of the habit of filing ATIPs. When was the last time you filed one?
It's been a while. Put it this way: it was the last time I filed an ATIP was, I think, before Trudeau waived the back end fees for the ATIP. So people don't realize is that prior to doing that, yeah, exactly. So you used to be able to file an ATIP for $5, but then the department would come back to you 3 months later and say, great, but for us to actually assign the man hours and the capabilities to give you your request, it's going to cost you $5,000. And then it would become a negotiation between you and the ATIP department, right? Like, and this was also one of the ways that information was kept essentially private. It was made expensive to access. Yeah. So to his credit, Trudeau actually did waive that fee. And somebody actually pointed this out to me on Twitter and corrected my snarky tweet about this. So thank you very much, Tim. But yeah, so now those back end fees have been waived, which is good, which is a legitimately good thing this government has done. It doesn't mean that our entire system isn't fucking broken. It completely still is.
Did you see the Ottawa Citizen report this week about that?
Oh, yeah. You would flag this. Please tell us.
So, there's not much to it. So, General Wayne Eyre, Chief of the Defense Staff, Commanding Officer of the Canadian Armed Forces, was given a briefing. I'm not even that familiar with the details of this, but he was given a briefing or a presentation about how to handle with sensitivity issues related to sexual misconduct, because obviously that's been a problem the military has been having. The Ottawa Citizen requested a government document related to that and was told they could not be found or did not exist. Yeah. But it was a trap because the Ottawa Citizen already had the document, and the government was saying, yeah, we can't find it. Maybe it doesn't exist. And he's like, actually, we have it already. And the government's like, oops, yep, found it. Sorry, we made a mistake here. No one believes it was a mistake. We all believe, and anyone who works in our industry believes the government lies to us regularly about what documents they can or cannot find. And I'm not, you know me, I'm not conspiracy minded, but I 100% believe that we are lied to about what access the government has to information if they just don't want to give it to us. And there's no accountability mechanism. So I love it. The Citizen is great. Anyway,
I don't know if we want to get into this, but I'm going to go off on these guys about this stuff.
In the written version?
Yes.
Well, you know what? Do it. And if you don't mind, you take point on that. You're fired up on this. I would include it. I would include at the very bottom, or maybe even as a separate 4-sentence blurb, just link to the Ottawa Citizen piece. Like people should know.
That one should probably get a little bit more attention than it's been getting. Speaking of something that might deserve less attention than it's been getting, we have not touched the grocery store inquiry stuff at all, because I think you and I share the opinion that it's stupid. Right?
Correct. That's my opinion. Yep.
Got it. So do we want to talk about why we think it's stupid, even if it's just on this podcast? Briefly?
What I would say is this. I have no doubt whatsoever that a lot of companies right now are profiting more due to inflation. I suspect that includes grocery companies. I don't think one of the things that the grocery companies have said is that their food margins, the profit margins on food are very tight. They've been making more money on other things like cosmetics, clothing, household goods. The nearest Loblaws to me, well, hang on, no, there's a very small Loblaws near me. The second nearest Loblaws to me, it's like a third of the footprint of the place is food. The rest of it is like clothes for
it's like Indigo in books now.
Kind of, yeah. I think that's a good way of putting it. And so it's just first, so there's that. Second of all, the government itself is making a ton of money on inflation. Inflation drives up tax revenues. I'd like to see Jagmeet Singh call Revenue Canada on the carpet here and start demanding why they're not refunding getting some of that money. The other third point I would make, and it's not even on the substance of this, it just goes to show you how snake bitten Jagmeet Singh is as a leader, right? He spent months trying to do this, finally got it. He had his big theatrical stack of papers. He got them on the carpet. He was going after them, and no one paid any attention because China electoral interference completely ate the news cycle that day.
Well, and I know that, but I mean, to me, the whole purpose of this inquiry against grocery, whatever, it's straight up playing to the base. It's 100% playing to the base.
It's for clips on Instagram.
It's clips on Instagram. It's him crying about, women not being able to feed their babies in the House of Commons. That's completely what this is for. It's utter theater. The other thing is there is this weird thing on the left, and maybe you can explain this to me. There's a weird lefty hatred of Galen Weston. And I think it's because he's broken one of the primary laws of being rich in Canada, and that is he's rich in Canada in public. So he becomes, well, no, but I mean, literally, this is a psychological thing. If you make a lot of money in Canada, you stay quiet about it, right?
You're supposed to be ashamed.
You're supposed to be kind of ashamed. You're supposed to put some landscaping up in front of your house to make sure people don't see how big it is. You wear decent, well-cut clothes, but not official, not name brand clothes. You know what I mean? You don't wear brands. There's rules about how to be mega rich in Canada, and Galen Weston kind of breaks them by being accessible in public. And as a result, he's a particularly hated scapegoated figure on the left. He also just sort of reeks of, I don't know, this sort of Canadian elitism, nevishness, right? That I think really sets a lot of people on the left off. So he's a wonderful foil for someone like Jagmeet Singh, even though Singh himself is obviously really wealthy. Not as wealthy as Weston, of course, but Singh's not doing too poorly either. So there's an interesting little psychological side thing there. But the thing that I would note is that people gave Weston, when he testified and Loblaws and whatever. Firstly, Loblaws is a very central Canadian thing, right? You know that, right? We don't have Loblaws out west. We have superstores.
I didn't know that. Is Superstore owned by Loblaws?
Yes, I think it's the same group, but it's not the bougie grocery store chain. Superstore is kind of like the Canadian Walmart-y grocery store chain. It's not bougie in the same way that I think it is in Toronto. So as a result, it's a different psychological thing. It's a different psychological hit out here.
Hang on. This might be my own Galen Weston showing here, but is Loblaws bougie?
Yeah, Loblaws is pretty bougie. I think Loblaws is super bougie compared to.
So where would I buy my groceries to show solidarity with the working class?
Oh, you'd probably we do have some bulk barns. We do have Co-op is really popular out here in Calgary, and it's actually a grocery cooperative, which is actually where we shop. It's great. Safeway's kind of going downhill lately, I think. Anyway, that's a kind of a good question. But anyway, I think Co-op and Walmart are generally sort of your working class.
Well, because I mean, I think here, real bargain grocery shopping would probably be No Frills, and I'm pretty sure that's owned by Loblaws.
Yeah, no Loblaws, but it's not low. Anyway, it's an interesting thing, right? Class and psychology play into this, which I think is interesting. So
your actual question, though, which I will say, one of the things you're overlooking is that Galen Weston and Loblaws was implicated in the bread price fixing.
The bread price fixing, which also made it very...
He's never been forgiven for that.
No, exactly. However, the thing that I would note, just on a real macroeconomic level here, is that this chain got, I think, pummeled for claiming a 4% profit margin, and people were like, that's the typical grocery chain profit margin is closer to 2.3 to 3% profit margin. So they were like, proof of price gouging. And I'm just kind of going, a 4% profit margin is still a really tight margin.
Yeah.
Just so that we're clear. That is not an egregiously profitable chain, particularly if most of their profit isn't actually coming from the food products. And secondly, if your inflation rates are going up by like 11% per year, that additional 1% margin that they're making on lipstick is not the thing that's driving up your grocery bills. Like that's it. Price gouging doesn't make sense. How should I say this? In an industry where the average profit margin is like 2 to 3%, and one company's making 4, price gouging doesn't account for an 11% increase in grocery bills. You know what I'm saying? Like what this tells you is that actually we're a pretty competitive market. I mean, especially in the urban areas, not so much when you're outside the urban areas, but most of the urban areas are pretty competitive on grocery prices. And the best way to actually keep prices down is competition, right? Mm-hmm. Like that's what it is. You want to make sure that people aren't stuck going to Loblaws and having that be their only option, because then of course they're going to increase in price gouge. So anyway, this is a long story. I don't want to write about this in the Dispatch. I do just want to comment on how stupid I think this is.
It was dumb. No, I agree. It was dumb.
It was dumb.
You know, we've probably talked about this in previous dispatches, but I remember giving you a warning, and it was the summer before last. So I think at the line we first began writing about inflation in the fall of 2021.
We were writing inflation when everybody was telling us it was crazy to write about inflation.
Yes. Yeah. And one of the things that really twigged me to that was a video, I think it was by an American farmer. He's an onion farmer. And I saw this video on YouTube where he's basically doing just like stand up straight into camera video where he's going, hey, folks, I'm telling you why you're going to have huge food inflation next year. And he had this really weird backdrop where he's standing in a warehouse with nothing but onions stacked behind him. And he started talking about how all of his inputs were up. And it's labor, fuel, fertilizers, equipment. One of the big problems they were running into at the time was shipping container shortages because of the dysfunction at the ports. And the guy was just basically saying, look, like I'm an onion farmer. Like I'm not an economist here, but I'm telling you, I need to charge more for all these onions behind me than I had to charge last year. And the grocery store is going to buy them because they need to get their onions from somewhere, and you're going to pay for it. And he says to me, this is not an onion specific issue, right? Like, and I went, oh, okay. And then at the time, everyone was telling us, no, there's no inflation.
Well, but then of course we were at the same time, I was hearing from like the cattle ranchers out here who were starting to overcull their cattle herd ahead of the winter because the cost of feed had gone up so much. Yeah. So they were just like, look, buy your meat now because beef's going to go through the roof in about 6 months when supply starts to dwindle. And that's exactly what happened. And as a result, actually, I think all of the cattle herds are still lower than they would traditionally have been because of the feed prices. So it's like it's multiple compounding input costs. And actually, if you want to get to the bottom of what's happening in food inflation, it's really complicated. And price gouging doesn't account for enough of it to justify what's happening here.
Well, in theory, Parliament actually would be a great instrument to do that, except we're not a serious country.
We're not a serious country. So anyway, I do think we do want to talk about China, but first I think that we want to put on the radar that the global economy might be collapsing again a little bit, or no?
Well, I don't know. I don't know how bad it is. So
we don't know how bad it is yet. So the banks are going weird on us again.
Yeah. So parts of this remind me with the Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank collapsing in the United States, and with Credit Suisse and First Republic Bank both under pressure. Obviously, there's some 2008 vibes here. The one thing the couple of things that I would say are different. First of all, we're all battle scarred from 2008. Yeah. And second of all, the government responded differently and faster this time.
Yes.
So I don't know.
And very aggressively.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know what kind of problem we're in. And that's just me being honest with you here. One of the things that worries me now, and it's an like I'm not specifically worried about, that will happen or this will happen. One of the things that worries me is a bank run is actually primarily a psychological phenomenon. Mm-hmm. You know, if you suddenly pull all your money out, I don't want to be the last asshole get in line. So I pull all my money out. That's a bank run. Panic.
Yeah, but to some extent, so is inflation.
Well, I'll talk about that in a minute. So a bank run is psychological, and I honestly don't know how a bank run would manifest in a social media age. So last weekend, I was trying to not be busy, and I was at hockey games. I was at a bar, and all my social media feeds were full of live streams of people in California lined up around banks, waiting to get in to get their cash. A bank run is a psychological phenomena, and we've never been better at transmitting information, which could include panic, at the speed of light than we are right now. And I don't know. So last weekend, it took the US federal government somewhere, but depending on how you want to define it, somewhere between 2 and 4 days to come out with a systemic risk plan to save the depositors at SVB and at Signature Bank in New York City. 2 to 4 days was not fast enough. But I also don't know if a federal government can actually move much faster than that. Like at a certain point, we are governing with instruments that do not keep up with the speed that this stuff can spread. So that's one point I would make.
Well, I would say there's always been a fail-stop option against a bank run, and that's the banks just shut down.
Well, that's what happened in Silicon Valley, right?
Yeah.
The Fed shut it down.
Well, no, but I mean, the bank itself can just basically close the doors and be like, we're shutting this down until you calm down.
Sort of, but one of the problems could be electronic withdrawals. So one of the
things I mean, I don't know if they have a technical capacity, but they can do exactly what banks did back in whatever the 20s or the 30s, and that is they literally lock the doors and say we are not giving you any more withdrawals. They could presumably do the same thing with electronic withdrawals. They could literally just say like, sorry, all assets frozen.
One of the interesting things on Monday that I was worried about was how many people had put in panicked withdrawal orders over the weekend that would not actually be looked at until Monday morning. Mm-hmm. So what would happen to the banking system in the United States? And ultimately, it seemed to go okay. But I was wondering how many banks on Sunday night had emergency teleconferences, and they're like, okay, we're stable, we're liquid, we're capital, we're good. And then they open on Monday morning, and it's like, we got 30,000 withdrawal orders that have just accumulated over the weekend. Are we going to honor these things? Ultimately, things look to be okay.
Well, and the other thing I would just note about bank runs too is that bank runs are a manifestation of lack of faith in the system.
Correct.
Right?
Yep.
Bank runs are a manifestation of a severe collapse of faith in the governments to backstop the banks.
Yeah.
Banks to make good on the instruments that the banks rely on to make good. So like it's a really interesting and telling system of a profound lack of trust in the mega structures of society.
You and I are all we're veterans of 2008. Veterans, survivors.
Yeah, I remember that.
Oh, I remember that too. I was saying last weekend, I mentioned I was at a bar. It was a family dinner for a birthday in the family. We got a really nice local restaurant with a nice bar. And I was talking with my dad and my brother-in-law, a very specific memory I have of going golfing the day Lehman collapsed. And we were like heading out the door. We were getting our water bottles from the fridge. We were all in our golf clothes. We're about to head off to the club. And it was, Lehman collapsed. And we spent the whole golf game talking about it. And we're trying to figure out what it meant. The point I would make, though, and it's the big point, I think what we're seeing here is that I don't think central banks can stabilize the banking system and fight inflation at the same time.
Oh, that's an interesting question.
Well, I mean, with SVB in particular, and I think Credit Suisse, like Signature Bank in New York City was highly exposed to crypto. So we could look at that and we can go, okay, that's anomalous. You're not going to have tons of blockchain and crypto exposure at most banks. But what happened at Silicon Valley Bank, I should say, Silicon Valley Bank in California, was that they bought in long-term on interest-bearing investments. But when interest rates went up, the value went negative on those investments. So they were earning less to own these things, and it cost to finance them because they were with their deposits, and they had cash flow problems, and they collapsed.
So this goes back to the macroeconomic problem, which is that when money's cheap, it's relatively easy to make money because
it's expensive.
When money starts to get more expensive, the weaknesses of a lot of the underlying.
It's easy to lose money.
It's easy. Well, and not only that, but I mean, it's not just easy to lose money, but when money's more expensive, the underlying structural weaknesses of the companies that were depending on cheap credit come due. If you are basically running your business on turning over debt, and you can afford to do that because the debt's basically at 0, 1, or 2%, what happens when the debt's at 4, 5, 6, 7%? You can no longer sustain the actual cost to maintain the cash flow, and you collapse. And so that's essentially what happens in a 1,000 different micro ways. If you have enough of these companies, we're essentially clinging on by their fingernails, and their balance sheets looked okay only because they had access to shit tons of cheap money. The cheap money dries up. When the water goes out, you see who can swim. That's the statement. So essentially, that's the interesting question. If a lot of these banks were only appearing to swim because they had access to essentially 20 years, 10 years of cheap money, and right now we're seeing the end of the cheap money era, how deep is the rot? And that is the interesting question that I think nobody can answer. I will say that maybe in terms of a blurb, maybe it would be interesting for us to do a bit of a victory run, because you and I were concerned about what was happening with the global economy. I think we noted it basically last summer with a statement of like, the bill's going to start to come due in September. I think that's more or less what's begun to happen. It just all didn't collapse in September. But I think that we saw a run up of a series of compounding economic problems, from inflation to supply chain issues to the impacts of higher interest rates. And now we're starting to see just the beginning of that rollover, whether or not it leads to a widespread collapse, or whether or not, the governments will be able to shore this stuff up. But also remember that the governments themselves are kind of dealing with empty pantries. They don't have the taxation capacity that they had 3 or 4 years ago to shore up endless amounts of shitty investment and bad banking decisions. So this,
and I've talked about that. We spent the emergency reserve in COVID.
We spent the emergency reserve on COVID, and the current inflationary issues we're dealing with are in part a response to that.
So look,
which I think is an uncontroversial point. So anyway, like I said, I don't know whether or not it will be fine, or whether or not it will be collapsed. It will either be fine or everything's going to collapse. I don't know which.
I honestly, if you were to ask me, I think I'm actually, and this is a rare statement of optimism from me, so everybody make a note of it, especially if I end up looking like an idiot. I think I'm weighted more to thinking things will be okay than things will be bad this time. But
unless of course the whole system's predicated on a basic rampant fraud and speculation, in which case that we just can't see yet, because we're in the middle of some kind of global scale financial bubble, in which case we'll be totally fucked.
I do not rule out the possibility that we're totally fucked. I just think my expectation, which may prove a problem this time, is more optimistic than normal.
Okay, so just Matt's team fine.
Well, put me down 60-40.
Totally fucked.
Put me down 60-40 for fine versus fucked. Okay. But what I think what is going to
call me 40-60, totally the opposite. Right. So there we go.
All right.
So there we go. We've built in enough of a wiggle room so that basically we can both.
We're never wrong.
We'll never be wrong.
This is how columnists thrive.
Well, this is the 330, or this is the 330, not 338. It's the 536 model of political forecasting. You have a 70%. You just say 70% chance Trump win, 30% chance Hillary fail, and it's completely unfalsifiable. That's how we survive.
What we'll see in the next couple of months is governments having to make a choice between stabilizing the banking sector and fighting inflation, because you fight inflation by raising interest rates, which will threaten banks that are long on interest-bearing assets that may in fact now go underwater. Okay, so fine. So fighting inflation will threaten some of the banks. What will propping up the banks require? Money printer go, brrr, which is inflationary.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't expect every central bank to respond similarly here. And look, I don't pretend to be an expert on this, but I've spent the last week talking with experts, some on record, some off record, trying to just get my head wrapped around this, because I'm not a banking guy. And that seems to be the consensus here. Our hard charge to confront inflation, which was belated but then strong, has threatened some of the banks. We don't know yet how badly or how many. Hopefully it's a few. Hopefully we've seen the end of it. But, when you see the Swiss putting 50 billion to back up Credit Suisse here, you start wondering how the rest of the banks are.
So the question is, do the mainstream economists think we're going to be fine now or not? Because I'm gonna adjust my tolls according to how they vote.
Yeah, but knowing you, if they all think we're fine, you're going to think we're fucked.
Correct. That is, and actually, that would have turned out to be the correct prediction quite a lot over the last 3 years.
My honest answer to that is I don't know. I've been
Okay,
talking
there's
to a
no.
bunch of them, guys I personally know and trust. I don't know if I have a sense of what the expectations are. I think the
Maybe they're being
markets
more
have
cautious
recovered a
now.
bit. So I
Yeah.
mean, purely. Oh, hang on, let me check. Let me just check the Dow right now. Let's look at it for the down a bunch today.
Oh dear. Everything's fine.
The Dow's
Basically,
down over the last month. It's positive over the last week. So I don't know. I mean, I don't see any easy shorthand to go, this is how they feel right now. All we can do is wait.
oh, I hate waiting. It's the worst.
No, we'll have stuff to talk about the
Um,
next time we do this. You
all
wanted
right,
to wrap my
so
knuckles about David Johnston.
yeah, because you thought he'd be fine, and now it's increasingly obvious that that's ridiculous. He's not fine at all. The perception of conflict is so obvious there. I mean, maybe we should start by
David,
we start by explaining. Okay, so David Johnston,
former
highly
Governor General.
respected, a very eminent Canadian, the most eminent of the eminent Canadians, perhaps, except for maybe short of a retired Supreme Court judge. We ran out of the retired Supreme Court pool in this country,
They're
and
all
we had
writing
to go.
reports.
They're all writing reports, so we had to start digging into the retired governors general. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
that's just where we are in the limited. I mean, eminent Canadians are a finite resource in this country, so we have to be
Not renewable.
they're non-renewable. So like we have to be sparing and careful about how we use the existing eminent Canadians who still exist. So anyway, David Johnston, former GG, assigned by Harper, looks in principle to be like the perfect special rapporteur to investigate Chinese interference, presuming that anyone treated that seriously in the first place, which nobody did. Everybody assumed that that was just going to be a giant joke. But anyway, and it probably will be, judging by the Liberals' response since their announcement of very serious measures to look into Chinese interference. So anyway, Johnston gets elected, and a bunch of people who are, vaguely familiar with Johnston's genuinely eminent and excellent reputation were like, good choice. And then, it became more and more obvious that Johnston's connections are so intertwined with Trudeau personally and professionally. Like he's a former member, I think, not director of the Trudeau Foundation.
He's involved in the Trudeau Foundation.
He's involved in the church, and also he's a longtime family friend of Trudeau. His kids and their kids cottage together. He's connected with the Rideau Foundation, which has Dominic Barton on the board. And like, there's just like the problem with being an eminent Canadian is that Canada is a trench coat filled with 6 people, all of whom are eminent. And like the interpersonal, we're so small and so fucking incestuous that everything is so interconnected that it actually is kind of hard to find a suitably eminent Canadian who would fail or lack to have the personal connections required for true impartiality. And by all accounts, Trudeau didn't look very hard because Johnston was the best he could come up with.
See, you're making the case against Johnston, but you're actually making my case for him. And I will say, so my original reaction this week when the announcement was, yeah, this was a good choice. I'm changing my mind on that. And I'm actually changing my mind on that because I actually thought the Globe and Mail's editorial on Friday was persuasive on this point, where they said, if there's any establishment of using former's Governor General on partisan issues, it's going to start skewing the job of the Governor General, which is an important job. That actually appealed to me more than the criticisms of Johnston's links. So I think I'm probably coming around to Johnston being a bad idea. But for everything you've said, it's not that I disagree with that. It's just you gotta show me someone else.
Okay, but here's the thing: is that I think Howard Anglin had a great piece in the Hub where he makes this point: is that the last thing you want investigating something like this is an eminent Canadian. That no, you want, and he makes the point, you want a former cabinet minister. You want someone who actually understands how politics works at the riding level. You want, a former intelligence mandarin, someone who's in the thick of it. You don't want someone who's got you don't want someone who is a showy and impressive CV or a former diplomat. That's the wrong type of person to be doing this kind of an investigation, because he's going to start going in and looking into, how writing nominations are done, and it's going to be lost. Like this is not the world an eminent Canadian lives in. You want someone who's like dirty. Like, no, not dirty, but I mean, you want someone who actually understands how these worlds work, so they can properly understand the spheres in which they are investigating. And Johnston, because he's an eminent, is poorly positioned to do that.
How many times did we send poor Martha Hall Finley off to tilt at the supply management windmills without accomplishing a fucking thing?
Martha Hall Finley would probably be good at this.
Sure, if we didn't care that it succeeded. Because the non-imminent Canadians don't get listened to. They write wonderful reports that are dustbined immediately.
Well, I don't know. Have we tried?
Yeah.
Putting a non-imminent Canadian in this? Like, seriously, have we tried expanding the scope beyond the 6 people in a trench coat?
We have used former cabinet ministers on high-level reports before. I'm trying to remember, I remember at the National Post editorial board, we used to joke about Martha Hall Finley because we trotted her out a bunch of times. Annie McClellan, I think, has been done some of these. John Manley might have done once or twice. I can't remember what for, though, which speaks to the point.
Are we under the illusion that the purpose of hiring Johnston for this was to do a good job of this?
No. Well, some people are.
So in which case it doesn't matter anyway. The obsession, the appearance of conflict of interest and the actual conflict of interest is part of the show. It's part of the reason why it works so well, because Trudeau can appoint someone who's got an obvious conflict problem. The Conservatives can just be like, this is an obvious conflict problem, and Trudeau can respond by like, you shitheads are just being partisan assholes who are going after this enormously credible, eminent Canadian whose integrity is unimpeachable. This is the whole point. This is the whole point of the exercise. It's not to get to the bottom of Chinese interference. I
don't think we disagree. I just think you're in the anger phase and I'm in the acceptance phase.
That's so common for us, though.
But being in the different phases?
I still have a soul, Matt.
That's debatable. Look, Johnston brings certain assets here in the fact that he has some profile and he has conservative connections too. The Liberals could have chosen worse than him. But I
agree with you there. They could have chosen worse.
What I think I said in I didn't touch on this much in my column earlier in the week for The Line. I mentioned it, but I didn't touch on it much because it was kind of developing as I was writing the column. One of the things I think it's becoming apparent, and it includes the Johnston stuff, but it also includes the filibustering, the skipping meetings and all that stuff, is that whatever the Liberals proposed originally before they kind of revealed how bullshit it was serious, but it was not sufficient. And I think what we're finding out now that it probably wasn't even that serious. So I still think we're in trouble here. But one of the concerns I have, and I wrote a column for TVO this week about this, and it was talking a little bit about this, but you know how Doug Ford is in trouble on the Greenbelt?
Yes.
I
in fact saw a naked topless woman about that this week.
Yeah.
That very issue.
Yeah, her boobs were out there on camera for a while. The Junos, was it? Something like that, and it took a while for them to cut away, so there's just a whole lot of boob for a minute.
Avril Lavigne got to tell the woman to get the fuck off the stage, which I respected and liked.
Yeah, good for Avril. So the related scandal for Doug Ford is alongside the Greenbelt. So the Greenbelt in particular, how am I going to summarize this in 20 seconds? Okay, the Greenbelt is a swath of protected land around the Greater Toronto area. It's protected from development for environmental reasons, protecting watersheds, and also to constrain urban sprawl. Doug Ford's government has opened up parts of it for development, and there has been allegations that Ford-friendly developers were uncannily good at predicting in advance which parcels of land would be opened up and happened to purchase them at rock bottom prices, all of a sudden to reap the benefit of these lands now being open for development. These are all allegations. Don't sue me. The other related scandal, God bless you. Right. The other related scandal is that a few months ago, Doug Ford's daughter got married. And at the wedding, as invited guests, were people with ties to lobbying and real estate development. And there was also a party before the wedding, a stag and dough, where people buy tickets to, donate money to the new couple. and real estate developers and lobbyists were there again too. So there's been these integrity complaints made against the Doug Ford government, and the integrity commissioner has not yet issued a final report, but put out a preliminary response this week to a request to the leader of the opposition, NDP leader Merritt Stiles. And I'm reading the report, and you know me, I always admire the professionalism and the candor and the hard work that goes into these reports. And I'm reading this, I'm like, yeah, okay, this all makes sense. This is a professionally crafted reply. But I'm also thinking, we're fucked. Because what the integrity commissioner is saying is that there is, first of all, two issues. Was it wrong for people with ties to the government in terms of commerce to be at the event? Apparently, no. As long as there is a personal relationship that exists, you are welcome to invite the person, as long as business is not discussed and no confidential information is disclosed. There's no way to prove that. So Premier Ford goes, nothing was disclosed and nothing was discussed. He gets a big check mark from the integrity commissioner. That's the extent of the vetting. But the real issue is the gifts. That has been the line of attack by critics of the Ford government, is a wedding gift to the daughter of the premier, or a stag and doe gift before the wedding to the daughter of the premier, influence peddling. According to the Members Integrity Act of 1994, no, because the only people who can be officially subject to influence are members of the legislature, which could include the premier, the spouse of a member of the legislature, or their minor dependent children. So if you're the premier, the day your eldest child turns 18, I show up with a birthday gift for them of $100 million in cash in a duffel bag. That would pass the Integrity Act.
Yes. So this is also one of my go-to rants about our integrity acts, and like I'm actually more shocked when people are found guilty of breaching integrity violations than they are found innocent, because there are so many loopholes in these things that people don't even realize. I mean, a totally comparable event is that Alison Redford, when she was premier in Alberta, got off on the Integrity Act when her government awarded like just $1 billion contract, like a huge contract to go after the tobacco companies, to the law firm of her ex-husband. And any sensible person would be like, wait, that's obviously a conflict of interest. And of course, there was all kinds of really interesting things about, she was I believe, Attorney General at this time. And there was all kinds of interesting things about basically her overriding her civil service recommendations in order to award this. So it was just, all of it was questionable and pretty problematic. But she got off on the integrity, the ethics commissioner report, because an ex-husband isn't considered a close enough contact to be considered problematic under the Integrity Act.
I can be giving $1 billion a day to the 18-year-old child of a sitting member of the legislature, and that is not considered influence peddling.
Which brings me back to the whole thing. So it's amazing to me that Trudeau and his government, his cabinet, have been nailed on this stuff as often as they have, because these integrity acts are hardly like dragnets, man. Like the bars are not high on these laws.
The reason I brought it up, though, it fits my Johnston view, or I think Johnston is a perfectly fine candidate, to the sense that we're not going to get anyone better. And the reason we're not going to get anyone better is because our body politic has no immune system. We are sitting ducks because we, like, as I wrote in my TVO column, like, the Americans have that saying, the Constitution is not a suicide pact. I said we need a Canadian version of that, but it's more like we shouldn't have to do stupid shit. Like, TVO doesn't like me to swear, so I had to like gussy it up a bit. But basically, that's what it comes down to. Like, if our laws are so toothless that they either permit or even encourage stuff that is obviously stupid and bad, it's a stupid and bad law. And right now, we're going into battle in a economically precarious environment. We've got climate change issues, we've got geopolitical issues, and our laws are stupid and dumb. Our political culture is stupid and dumb. You know, we have liberal committee members reading newspaper articles to avoid a vote on issue, and this is a national security matter. So I'm not a pessimist on these issues, because I think we face unprecedented challenges. Like, my grandparents fought Nazis. Like, we've had big problems before, but I just don't think we have a civilizational immune system right now. Like, it was kind of what my column couple weeks ago about POEC, where like what we realized in the convoy crisis is that like a half competent group of professionals with any event planning skills could probably topple the Canadian federal government. And what we're finding out with both integrity issues in Ontario and Alberta, as you mentioned, and then this federal stuff, you don't need to be a genius to cut through us like a hot knife through butter on election peddling here. You just need to be like borderline competent, and we have no defense against that. That's what worries me about all this stuff. It's not the scale of the challenges, it's the ineptitude of our response.
I can think of a Churchillian quote here that I would repurpose for the moment, but I don't have Churchill quotes sitting in the back of my memory. So I think we have to put a pin in it there because we've been going on for a good long while now.
Yep, good talk.
But so let's not do anything on the grocery store stuff.
Okay.
Let's have me go off about C18. Me, you, or someone else.
I'll do finances, but I'll run that by someone who knows it better than I do.
Yeah, you do finances, and then we'll see if one of our colleagues wants to do the Johnston stuff.
Sure. Okay. Yep. Okay. And whatever else trickles in. Plus,
that's three meaty blurbs in our discussion.
Yeah, and we'll see whatever else the news gods drop on us on a Friday.
Yes, and on that note, we should probably put this podcast out as soon as humanly possible.
I will do that right now. Okay.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Some food. Bye.
Yum. Okay. See ya.